Now, I was a very industrious, ambitious young man. When I joined the staff in the mid-'70s of Hippocrates, I had a lot more questions than I had answers. I was 98% questions and 2% answers. And the question I kept asking Anne is, why does this work? Now, I knew it worked because we would see in those early days, she started in the 50s, remember. This is our 57th year, Hippocrates. The only people that came to us were incredibly ill. I mean, they would have had to be told you have, 5 hours to live. And then they'd say, okay, we'll go. And so I would watch them come in. We've always had a very staunch rule, because we're not a hospital, that you have to be able to walk, talk, function, and understand. And they would do that until they got to their room, and then they'd fall into bed. And we didn't put them out at that point. And I'd watch them walk out of the bed, and a week later, running around the institute, and here they were getting better. And I kept asking, why is that happening? And when I went to Europe, they sent me to Europe, where I brought raw and living food back, the message back to Europe, because America is not the epicenter in modern times of the raw and living food movement. It was actually founded in these recent centuries by a doctor called Dr. Christine Nolfi, a Danish doctor. And the words living food, she gave that to us. And she was told she was going to die from breast cancer, recovered from that, from eating raw food, and opened up the modern first raw food center called Homnegarden. It means hops garden, on the sea in Denmark. And I had the great privilege, when I was there for 3 years in Europe, I was asked to direct that center for an entire year. And boy, did I learn a lot, and I learned how incredibly wonderfully sophisticated a lot of the older cultures, like the Scandinavian cultures, were in Europe. And when I was there, I had an opportunity to work with well people, which was really a totally new experience for me. Everyone was really ill before. And I found that who comes to health centers like Hippocrates in some European countries are healthy people for holidays. Now, it took us until the 1980s before I started to see that trend. And now at Hippocrates, it's loaded quite often with a lot of healthy people, not just ill people. But that resounding question, and Anne would be frustrated with me because she didn't have the increment to talk about the science, and I didn't have the spiritual instinct to understand that you didn't really have to know at that point. But I'm going to explain the science to you a little bit, because it's quite simple, and everyone will understand why raw living food brings people back to life, prevents the premature aging process unanimously, prevents disease, and gives you a whole lot more energy to have fun than you could ever have any other way. Now, a lot of you that just initiated raw food probably thinks that I just embellished that, because when you start with this, you feel sicker, you feel weaker, you get bloated, you get tired, you want to vomit, and on the list goes. So you say, well, this guy has to be out of his mind, because he told us we're going to feel great. The good news is nature has a sense of humor. Nature says, look it, this woman has really messed up. This man is messed up. We can't let them off the hook easy. You know why? Nature is smart. Nature says, we have to make you suffer a little bit. And if you suffer, maybe you won't be foolish enough to go back and repeat those patterns that made you sick to begin with. So living nutrition, what is that? It's food containing high-frequency nutrients. Now, this is a brand new concept in the world of nutrition. But remember, that doesn't say a lot. Nutrition only began in 1928 here in New York at the university we call Cornell University. There was no nutritional science until 1928. And the very first nutrient, as you're going to learn in my supplement segment this weekend, where I expose supplements where 91% are dangerous for you, not only not good for you, but dangerous and create disorder. I'm going to tell you that the very first nutrient that was ever discovered was in 1905 by young Dr. William Fletcher in London, England. And so this is really new. And what the 21st century is going to bring us to, and we're going to drag everyone along kicking and screaming and denouncing it, is that what we really look for in food is not what we thought we needed before. Yes, we get protein if you're eating this way. The most protein of any diet in the world you get from the Hippocrates living food diet. And we know that not only personally when we're lifting weights, several days a week and exercising vigorously 6 days, but when we train Olympic athletes, that's proven itself in the clinical research that we conduct on an ongoing daily basis, 365 days a year. But we also understand it's not the fats or not the carbohydrates. These are what we call the substance part of nutrition. What we really need is the life force, the electromagnetic frequency that's in all living things, including you if you're well. As a matter of fact, one of the latest tools that we use at Hippocrates is called a cyber scan. It completely avoids the matter-based part of structure and goes right to the frequency of every cell that in fact makes your skeletal structure, your organs, etc. And when we can monitor the electromagnetic frequency of those cells, and we know that the weakness is there, it's like a light that's fading rather than a bright, new, fresh light, we can then give you particular foods that have high frequency, but also electromagnetic, cold laser, other therapies that help to rapidly bring that back to what it should be, the normality. Now we're going to introduce a new era of hope. What I concluded after years and years and years, and this probably came together in my mind about a decade and a half ago or a little more, that the 4 elements within living raw food you get that you do not get in cooked food. And let's make this as incredibly clear as you can get it. If I went and got the best organic vegetable out of my garden in the backyard that's been growing in remarkably rich soil, and I brought it into the house and I washed it and ate it, or brought it into the house, washed it and cooked it, what the difference would be is you would not have these 4 elements. Because once you cook a food, the hormones that are in the food dissipate, the oxygen dissipates, the phytonutrients dissipate, and the enzymes dissipate. So that's hope. Easy for you to remember. Now, each and every one of those have a significance. Hormones are chemistries that within the constraints of your anatomy and biochemistry are the language between cells. So how your cells speak to one another, how your cells communicate with one another is with hormones. Nature, through the evolutionary process, somehow created these hormones in food to be the constant, ongoing new supply of fresh language that your body can capture so cells know what the other cell is doing. Now, why do cells have to communicate? Well, can you imagine if a cell doesn't know what it should do? It may do something called mutate. And today, we went from 100 years ago with 2 to 3% of the public having cancer to now over 50% of us having cancer. And I assure you, the central cause of that is cells do not know how to communicate. Now, part of it is we're not giving hormones to the body in a natural way, but sadly, we're giving unnatural hormones in ways that we didn't even know or suspect we were doing. Because pesticides, fungicides, herbicides, plastic chairs you're sitting on, the polyester undergarments you're wearing, and the list goes on, all mimic estrogens. Now, they weren't meant or built or created as chemistry to create estrogens, but your body perceives them as estrogen, so we confuse the cells, and the language no longer is clear. Here's what you should be, but is either silent or confusing to the cell. Next, oxygen. We've known now for at least 140 years that oxygen is central within the cellular and anatomical structure of the body, not only to make the cell strong enough to create healthy tissue, but we know it's also the central cause of life as we know it. Remember, the most important element that we capture is oxygen. Without it, we will die in approximately 7 minutes. The two totally natural ways we get oxygen, there are other ways, but the natural ways, are breathing, which even those of us who attempt to do that well fail at that. And the second is in food itself. 90 years ago, a German scientist was given an award, a Nobel Prize, when he showed us that nutrients could not digest or ingest into the human cell unless oxygen was present with the nutrient. So if the vitamin didn't have oxygen with it, you couldn't really digest into the cell the vitamin or the protein. Now, we've known that for 90 years, but now you have a totally dead 91% of supplements made out of chemicals that obviously have no oxygen, and by the way, take oxygen out of your body. But where do you get oxygen and nutrients together? In the one place that all creatures except humans and the animals we've disturbed get it. Raw, organic, vegan, living food. Now I'll repeat the last part so you're clear on this. Every single creature on this earth, except humans and the animals we've disturbed, their environments, we've husbandried them, eat a 100% raw diet. There is no creature in nature, naturally, that doesn't eat a 100% raw diet. We are the best example in the history of humanity, not recent years, the thousands of years of humanity, of what raw food diets do to bring people back to life again. So we're the living laboratory, the scientific epitome of why raw living foods work. The next, I could entertain, you'll hear me speak about this, the most exciting finding in nutritional science ever is phytonutrients, phytochemicals. First phytochemical was literally discovered by chance in 1948 when a scientist was looking at his microscope, dissecting vegetables and fruits, and noticed an element coming out on the petri dish that literally would then chase bacteria, viruses, cancers, etc. Now he, like I would have at that time, thought he was going bonkers. So brought some of his colleagues in and said, hey, are you seeing what I'm seeing? Whatever this element is, they didn't know what it was popping out of a vegetable or a fruit, and they couldn't even differentiate differences in the one, but there were differences, they found, because they found that a particular vegetable, this element that came out, would chase carcinoma. And then another vegetable would chase viruses born. And this was cataloged as a phyto, meaning plant nutrient. Good thing to call it if you don't know what it was. Nobody did anything about it at all from 1948 till really 1992. 1992, the evil empire, the pharmaceutical industry, started to get a reading from the public here and around the world that they weren't really content with pharmaceutical drugs and the way that they were prescribing them, and so started to put some significant money, first at Johns Hopkins, into researching plant medicine. So they went back to where it all began 100 years before, because the only medicine 100 years ago was plant medicine. How many of you know that? There was no medicine other than plant medicine until the pharmaceutical industry came out and said, hey, we can get patents on plant medicine if we change the structure just a little bit. And they, in the first generation, just did a little bit, and the herbs and medicines were still pretty good. But by the second generation, started to get a little silly and believe they knew more than God and nature, and made it more dangerous until now. If you listen to an ad on medicines, you have to be nuts to take them. I mean, honest to God, they say 2 or 3 good things, then, 50 seconds of your legs falling off, your eyeballs popping out, and it's always the last one, and possibly fatal. Well, gee, let's go out, Jane, and get some of that stuff. So Johns Hopkins did a study, and this one really put a lot of steam behind what Anne had discovered and utilized in the early 1950s to reverse her own cancer, sprouts. Because they first realized that areas of the world where people consume large amount of cruciferous vegetables, Cruciferous comes from the word cabbage. If you open a cabbage up, it looks like a cross in it. Isn't that interesting? I didn't know that until recently. I use that word, it sounds sophisticated. Somebody said, do you know what it means? I didn't. What it is, it's a cross in that. So the cruciferous family, where people consume them, there were less forms of cancer or types of cancer in those areas. They looked at cabbage, they said, that's terrific. They looked at broccoli and found out it was magnificently better than any of the other cabbage family foods. As always, the youngster who was a graduate student at Johns Hopkins said, well, my God, if the broccoli is good, and you may remember Daddy Bush at that point getting in trouble when he said, I don't like broccoli. That was a result of Johns Hopkins study. He said, why don't we sprout some broccoli seeds? And then they found out broccoli sprouts were dozens of times more effective on killing cancers, every form of cancer. And in years after that, 2 occasions I met the 2 cancer doctors, oncologists, that worked on that study, independently, both without urging, told me the most important anti-cancer medicine they'd ever researched was broccoli sprouts. They actually, during that study, came up with a name called Phytochemo. What does that mean? Because they were equating the carcivorous phytochemicals called self-affirming as more effective than chemotherapy on killing cancer cells. Now, you may be just hearing that for the first time today, and it's a shame that everyone hasn't been told that every day, because now more than 50% of you will have cancer in your life or somebody you love. Lastly, enzymes. If you've read anything from the enthusiasts and the cheerleaders of raw food, they get mono-focused on enzymes. And enzymes are really important. But enzymes aren't what you always read they are. Enzymes are, in science, called proteins. That's also wrong. The outside shell of an enzyme is a protein. In fact, just like your outside shell called your skin, the largest organ in your body, is a protein. If I never saw a human before, and I came to this planet and I had to analyze you, and they say, what's it made out of? I'd say, well, it's a protein. But if I said that, you should get a little upset and you should say, wait a minute, I have an emotional state, I have a spiritual state. So what is the emotional and spiritual state of an enzyme? The electromagnetic frequency that your electromagnetic body requires to function. So why raw foods are incredibly important for that frequency, high-frequency nutrients, is because nature made raw living food your way to constantly get the supply of electromagnetic frequency to maintain health year after year after year, decade after decade, so that we could live the prerequisite 140 years that we should be living today if we could just remove stress and the degradation of this planet's environment. If we got rid of stress and got rid of the degradation of the planet, we would all commonly be living 140 years. Another interesting point on this, when I was studying this at university as a kid, I was stunned to find out that all creatures in the wild, again, live 7 times the length of their maturity. So a bird that matures in a year lives 7 years. But a boy, girl, don't let the men know this, but women mature a little sooner than we do, but we'll bring an average here. The average is we mature at about 20. That's when we mature biologically, physically. So 20 times 7 is what? Okay. I don't think I'm going to make it to 140. I just hope I'm laughing the day I die. The reality is my children have that opportunity, and hopefully their children and their children's children have a better opportunity, because I see this century as a time that science and spirituality will come together, and we will put the brakes on and bring ourselves back to the basics again. Don't think the bad is ever going to win, because inevitably it loses. So the hope is what we get in this food.